Gay, let's talk a little bit about this refuge, and let's talk, before we talk about actually this refuge, let's talk about refuges in general, because I don't know whether or not people really understand. First of all, where are we located?
Well, we're located just on the northern outskirts of the city of Monroe, Louisiana.
Mm-hmm. And this is called a refuge, not a park, and this is federal, not state. And I think a lot of people get confused.
Well, this refuge and all of the 547 National Wildlife Refuges are part of a system of refuges across the nation that's managed or is under the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which is an agency of the Department of the Interior. We manage over 95 million acres of land, which is more than the National Park Service, but a lot of people don't even distinguish between us, and a lot of people don't even know National Wildlife Refuges exist. Particularly people here, because our name is Fish and Wildlife Service and the state game agency is the Wildlife and Fisheries. People don't distinguish between the two, and the district office for the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries is just across the railroad track from our refuge. We oftentimes have people come here for boat registrations or hunter safety cards or whatever, and we have to refer them down the road.
Now, of course, this is not, and I'm glad you brought that out, this is not where you launch your boat, this is not where you pitch your tent.
Well, no, we don't have camping here, but we definitely do have fishing. Our lake is a very popular fishing area. On National Wildlife Refuges, what distinguishes us from park is that we are here for the wildlife. We're here to provide habitat and conservation protection for wildlife, fishes, plants, and their habitats. We do offer public use on most of our refuges have some form of public use, but the public use that we do here needs to be wildlife dependent. In other words, hunting and fishing are wildlife dependent. And if the refuge is, if the purpose of the refuge allows for hunting and fishing, and if it's appropriate at a particular refuge, then we offer that. Over half the refuges offer fishing, and a lot of them offer hunting. And then we have wildlife observation and photography, which are some of what we call our Big Six wildlife dependent visitor services, and wildlife photography and observation are two of those. And then the other, which I'm heavily into, is environmental education and interpretation, where we help people make connections with the wildlife, with the outdoors, with nature. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Let's talk about the residents of this refuge. A number of them out there.
Oh, the wildlife? Well, this particular refuge, and many refuges across the country, are wetlands, or have wetlands associated with them. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service manages those wildlife species which can't be adequately managed by an individual state or even an individual country, and those certainly include migratory birds. Initially, many of the refuges were set aside for waterfowl, and so we have a lot of wetland refuges across the country where you have migrating waterfowl north and south. And then also very important are our neotropical migrants and our other migrant songbirds. They use refuges a lot for habitat, both nesting, wintering, and resting in between, resting and feeding in between in their migration routes. Other residents in general of refuges may be, there are some refuges that are set aside specifically for habitat for endangered species. Like the manatee, we have a refuge particularly for manatee habitat, for other species that may need some particular help, right, in terms of habitat.
Mm-hmm. What about this woodpecker that we see some displays on in the visitor center?
Okay, we do have that on our refuge complex. This is a complex of actually 5 refuges managed together, and this visitor center and this environmental education center are complex centers. I mean, we developed it for the whole complex. And we have a red cockaded woodpecker population on, actually on 2 of our refuges, but we're really managing it on one because it's a single bird on the other. And But we have to manage for that. It's an endangered species, and so we manage the upland areas of that particular refuge for the older pine. They need older pine trees in a relatively park-like setting, so we use fire to manage there, and thinning and that type of thing.
Well, now, when you say complex, could you explain to us the refuge complex that you have here in North Louisiana?
Right. Our refuges, we have Darbone Refuge, which is north of West Monroe, Louisiana. That's about 17,500 acres along the Darbone Bayou, which is a scenic stream here in Louisiana. We have Upper Ouachita, which stretches about 18 miles from the Arkansas line down nearly to Sterlington, Louisiana, on either side of the river. And that's a large refuge, about 42,000 acres. We have a little small 500-acre tract north of Bastrop called Handy Break, which is just basically a big wetland, and fills up with ducks in the winter and has an observation platform, but no other public use there. And then we have Black Bayou Lake, where we have a nice 1,600-acre lake, very popular for fishing. We have about 4,600 acres here, and about half of it is open for hunting. We've really developed this for visitor services in terms of environmental education. We do thousands of school children through here every year. We have a lot of interpretive information out. We have panels around to interpret various aspects of the wildlife and the refuge itself. We have boardwalk, raised asphalt, nature trail, walking trail. We have other walking trails around the edge of the lake in this area that are just kept mowed but not surfaced. We have an arboretum with nearly 150 native Louisiana woody plants that all are labeled with scientific and common names. We have our learning center here, which has live exhibits. We have live fish and reptiles, and we have little alligators in there, and turtles and snakes, and so we have live exhibits there, as well as our discovery room, where we have a lot of activity, hands-on things there. We have a raised observation platform over a more remote part of the lake than where we are now, and we have a very nice photo blind over a marshy area that is more like a shallow pond area, also associated with a more remote place. We're fixing to have a very, very nice large bird viewing area with things to attract the birds, feeding stations and water features and things where people can go and sit and just observe birds, which will be located out behind the visitor center in the little wetland woods out there.
Well, really, Gay, this is the only place that people can actually see these birds and wildlife kind of up close and personal.
Well, no, that's not the case. I mean, there's a lot of habitat around here, but in this particular place, for instance, it's being developed all around the refuge. We have housing developments going in, businesses along 165, and of course Monroe's coming in on the south end of the refuge. So this is going to be a little pocket of habitat for these animals. But I mean, we have people certainly that see them in their yards, and we have state management areas and so forth. So it's not the only place they can see them, but it's a very good place to see them, and it's a good place to just come and experience a more or less natural setting. Now, a lot of this refuge was cotton plantation for 150 years. As a matter of fact, our visitor center was the original cotton plantation house, the planter's house that was built here. We had to move it to this site, but it was on part of this property now. And so we have restored, and that's part of what Fish and Wildlife Service in our refuge system does, is to try to restore native habitats, because if you want to have wildlife, then you need to have the habitat. So we took these agricultural fields and we've replanted about 14 species of what would have been here prior to their clearing. And so that's a big part of the work that Fish and Wildlife Service does, is habitat restoration. Now, you can't put all the hydrology back, and you can't necessarily recreate a forest, but you can go a long way toward having a habitat similar to what was here before.
Let's talk a little bit about the federal government and the refuge program, because evidently there's somebody somewhere in a building in Washington saying that would be a good area, or do they take comments from residents of various states as far as what area should be a refuge?
Well, the refuge system, of course, prioritizes acquisitions, but when a refuge is being in the planning stages, the lands that are most beneficial are for wildlife are located or determined, and a lot of what we try to do is create wildlife corridors. So you'll see a lot of refuges located along streams, for instance, because if we can create a corridor of habitat so that we don't have a lot of problems that wildlife face today is that their habitat is so disjunctive. I mean, it's just so cut off from each other. It's so isolated pockets. And so as we identify land for the refuge system, we look for priority sites that would fit into a corridor of habitat, so that we've got Felsenthal in Arkansas and overflow, then we come down to Upper Ouachita and down to Darbone Refuge. So we're building a corridor. The Red River Refuge, which is another one that right now is complexed with us, will be a whole system of lands along the Red River all the way almost from Arkansas down to Colfax. So it's going to be different tracts, but it'll all be building into this corridor. A lot of wildlife need these, corridors for their movement and just to be able to connect with each other.
Let's talk a little bit about activities that you normally have here just outside of Monroe. What's going on?
Well, we have two regularly scheduled monthly programs. We have one for youngsters 3 to 5 year old. We call it Tales and Trails, and it involves a story time and a little craft and a little snack, and then an outside activity, a hike or something. That's every month on the third Thursday. Then we have our Wild Friday program. So last Friday of the month, it's an evening program, and we just have a lot of different topics. A lot of different speakers will come in and do programs for us of various topics, somehow related to wildlife or the refuge or the area. Our last one was related to the history of the Ouachita River 200 years ago. It was about the Dunbar Hunter expedition that took place at the same time the Lewis and Clark expedition did, to explore this part of the Louisiana Purchase. And we had a big crowd of history buffs, which are not necessarily regular attendees of our Wild Fridays, but we had a subject they were interested in. So, we draw in different audiences that way. And of course, we have school programs here. This early in the school year, we haven't really started seeing those yet, but I have one set up for early next month. So we'll start having school programs. We try to be an extension of the classroom and address the grade level expectations that the teachers have to have the students meet, so that we can actually have them experiencing the learning here, hands-on learning activities here, so that we hope it'll last longer. Stays with you longer when you do it and see it and hear it all at the same time.
That is true. Gay, thank you very much for the information on the refuge. And if people want additional information, if they want to come out by themselves, how can they get that?
Well, we're located right off of Highway 165 north of Monroe on Richland Place, and they can come out anytime. We're open daylight hours 365 days a year. Our visitor center is open 8 to 4 Monday through Friday. It's open 9 to 5 Saturday and 1 to 5 Sunday. But the refuge itself, the lands and the trails, are open 365 days a year except after dark. Yeah, it's closed at night.
And there's no admission charge.
There's no admission charge. There is a $2 launch fee for our boat launch, but other than that, there's no charge.
Thank you for the information.
You are very welcome. Thank you for coming.